Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I now present to you the next discussion panel titled Risk Management for New Asset Classes. This session consists of an interactive Q&A where we encourage guests to post questions and comments to the panelists through a Slido QR code on the left and right screens. Please allow me to introduce the next panel. First, we have our session moderator, Ms. Leslie Tan, Specialist Counsel, Weebok Ryan, Singapore. May I now invite Ms. Tan up on stage, please. Joining Ms. Tan on the panel are Mr. Matt Cannock, Managing Director, Latitude Brokers Limited, Mr. Nick Shaw, Chief Executive Officer, International Group of P&I Clubs, Mr. Diego Kosulic, Regional Director and Consulting Chemist, CMC Marine Private Limited. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. I will now hand over the time to Ms. Tan for this session.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us in today's panel discussion on risk management for new asset classes. My name is Leslie Tan, and I'm a Specialist Counsel at Weebok Ryan, Singapore. I'm delighted to be moderating the panel, and today what we're going to talk about is how risk is a key consideration when dealing with emerging technologies. Each of our panelists brings a unique perspective to this topic. First, we have Mr. Matt Cannock, Managing Director at Latitude Brokers.
Thanks, Leslie.
Mr. Nick Shaw, CEO of the International Group of P&I Clubs.
Morning, everyone.
And Mr. Diego Kosulic, who we all know from our previous presentation, and Director at CMC Marine.
Good morning.
Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. And could I ask you each to briefly introduce yourselves to the audience?
Thanks, Leslie. My name's Matt Cannock. As you can see, I'm the Managing Director of Latitude Brokers here in Singapore. We're a pure marine insurance broker based here in Hong Kong with a parent company based in France. Me personally, celebrating 30 years in insurance this year, and in that time I've been a technical consultant, an underwriter, Lloyd's underwriter, a service provider for a warranty surveyor, loss adjuster, and a broker. So I've seen it from all sides.
Morning, everyone. So I'm Nick Shaw. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the International Group of P&I Clubs, the 12 group clubs that make up the group. And my role is to help coordinate the group activities where the group clubs come together to pool and reinsure their third-party liability risks, to share expertise and act as a collective voice in the industry. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Diego Kosulic, and I'm a consulting chemist. And my role is advising industry players, particularly P&I clubs and insurance companies, on cargo quality dispute and bunker quality dispute. So I attend very often on board ships, investigating cargo specification and bunker specification. We have a team for taking samples. So we attended chemical laboratories, and we issue expert reports detailing how the contamination happened, who's responsible for it, and how to deal with the cargo or bunkers. And I've been based in Singapore for the last 15 years.
Fantastic. So at the risk of sounding a bit like an American game show host, I think we've got a fantastic panel today. So what are some examples, can you tell us, and this question goes out to all three of you, what are some examples of new asset classes in the maritime industry? And how would you say these differ from traditional assets that we've otherwise seen? Perhaps we could start with you, Matt.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, I think I've just seen a question pop about, are any new asset classes really new? Which is an excellent question as well. Yeah, I think we are going through a considerable period of change. And there are new risks. There are new fuels, new vessel types, new trade patterns, which all affect insurance and affect the premiums that people will pay. I think the key thing to emphasize, and speaking for insurance, is that as an industry, we've always adapted, we've always changed, we've always fitted the requirements of the industry. every risk that is insured today was insured for the first time once. You know, there was the first LNG carrier, first VLCC, first ship made of iron. So whilst there are new asset classes and variations on current asset classes, as an industry, insurance feels very able to cope with those changes.
I might add to that. So the group is presently celebrating its 125th anniversary. And P&I clubs were, of course, set up by ship owners around 150 years ago, the first ones. And they've always been there to help ship owners on a mutual, not-for-profit basis to look at risks and then to cover risks. So as Matt was saying, we've always been in the business of assessing risks, assessing the information that's available in terms of emerging risks, and then working with our industry association partners to really understand those risks. And why is that important? It's very important because we need to take our reinsurance partners with us on the journey in assessing any emerging risks. So there is a process there, and within the international group, bringing together the expertise of the 12 clubs, working with industry association partners, we're able to assess those new risks, and then the individual clubs will go out and underwrite the risks on behalf of their ship owner members.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. And Diego, anything to add to that?
Yes, I would like to add that, these new bunkers, they are something that we already know because they have been carried as cargo for many years. So in a way, the expertise is there. But there is a change that we really need to consider, is that these products have been carried in the cargo tanks. Basically, they have been locked away and discharged as soon as possible at the next port. Now, instead, they have to be burned on board the ship. And so there is an additional factor and an additional risk there, which makes them, in a way, a new asset class. And also, we should consider that these fuels, these products, they have always been handled by the deck crew, right, as cargo. Whereas now, a different set of people we have to deal with them, which is the engine crew. So, you have new people having to do new things on the same products which we know. So there is a difference there. And it also carries the risks with all these changes.
Right, so new training required for the new crew members who are dealing with that. So excellent. So some insightful comments that we've had, and I'd like to build further on that. So what could you say are the key challenges and opportunities in managing and underwriting risks for these new asset classes? Mix things up a little bit. We'll start with you, Nick.
So I think first of all, we need to deal with the regulatory changes that are required to handle and to make sure that the new fuels are fit within the limitation regimes. Chow Wu earlier on was identifying that there may be a bit of a gap between the existing conventions and the requirements to bring the new fuels within those conventions. And so there are a number of ways in which the IMO and I think CMI are looking at that gap analysis and working together to see what changes might be necessary to make sure that the conventions still apply or might need to be amended very slightly, bearing in mind that there may well be some time gap before new regulations can be put into force. So that is one hurdle. I think the training hurdle is also there, and I think the relevant associations, the ITF, the International Chamber of Shipping, are all looking very closely at the operational issues that are created by the new fuels and what training, further training may be required to ensure that these fuels can be loaded and managed safely on board. as Diego just said, a lot of these fuels have been carried as cargoes for many years. So they're not completely foreign, and I like to think that some of those videos he was showing earlier are at least 20 years old, and that standards have come on a little bit since then.
And Matt, you also have an insurance background. What do you think some key opportunities and challenges might be?
Yeah, I think it's important. We're very good at talking about challenges and how difficult it is. I think at this point, it's important to look at perhaps Nick's part and the P&I separately from hull and machinery insurers. P&I is mutual, not-for-profit. Hull and machinery insurers like to make money. They don't always do that. For them, the opportunity is going to be first mover advantage. If you're the first insurer who is able to produce a product that fits the needs of somebody operating sailing freight vessels or using new fuels, trading new routes, then you will have an opportunity to operate in a smaller market. Most of the pricing in insurance is, and don't tell anyone this, it's not very scientific, it's mainly driven by capacity and how much availability there is of cover. The more people doing things, the cheaper prices become. The carriers that develop relationships with technology providers, with owners, and are able to provide products that tailor them and do that as a smaller group, they'll be able to charge more and will be in a less crowded market space. So the opportunity to make money, and I think that's, it's a shipping conference, that's why we're all here, right? I think that can't be left behind amongst talking about all the challenges that we have.
So thank you, Matt. And that segues quite neatly into the next question, which is, so you've got extensive experience as an underwriter. Could you tell us what are some examples of new products or coverage that might need to be implemented to insure these risk assets?
I think the key thing is there's a lot of the current policies in place and a lot of the current products are very well understood. There's a lot of case law. People know how they work. It's important that those are evolved to fit the new situation, the new products. I think the dual fuels is a great example, where there is some within LNG trades. There's been dual fuel vessels for 10, 15 years now. To take that knowledge and apply it to vessels now, the container ships and the passenger vessels that are using LNG, I think to learn those lessons is really important.
Thank you. Thank you. And Nick, given your knowledge and experience within the shipping world and the P&I world, how would third-party liability risks be impacted by these new asset classes? So that's the first question. And then the second question is, and how do you view the role of P&I clubs evolving as a result of this?
So in terms of the new risks, I think we've already identified that there may be risks to seafarers in handling the new fuels which were not there before. So I think in terms of developing the P&I experience of handling those new fuels, we'll be looking at the claims records as we go forward in respect of potentially personal injury claims, even loss of life in relation to new fuels, and seeing whether this is in fact makes them more dangerous than existing fuels. So I think that will evolve over time. I think it's important to remember what one of the earlier speakers said today, which is 50% of the new order book now is dual fuel capable. And so these fuels will start to get used, but we're still at the R&D phase. And if I can do a shout out for Singapore and the research that they're doing through the Decarbonisation Centre, this sort of analysis is very, very important, where you have a sophisticated maritime port, one of the key bunkering hubs in the world, doing some of the R&D for the industry to help us understand what the risks are and what training requirements and what developments we're going to need to understand those risks going forward. So that's just one example. Yeah.
Okay. So that sounds like it's a trifecta between the clubs, government, research institutes, and obviously the companies. And Diego, as a marine specialist, what are some strategies or best practices that you think the industry can implement to manage and mitigate the risks? And I know you mentioned to me earlier during the break that you've actually had a claim relating to one of these alternate fuels.
Yes. I think we need to make a distinction. So there's a type of risk which is the technical risks in handling these new fuels. And we've seen through my presentation, I mean, toxicity for ammonia, fire for LNG, and so forth. But there is also, let's say, and this can be addressed. Of course, we cannot change the physical and chemical properties of these products. I mean, so what we can do is to train the people that have to handle them. So training is extremely important. And not just the crew, but the surveyor, the people working in the port. Everyone needs really to know what these fuels are and how they behave, particularly in crisis situations. And on the other side, you have to have all the equipment on board in order to deal with these products. We've seen, for example, the invisible flames for methanol, which means thermocameras everywhere. So you have to have all these equipments, and you have to maintain them properly, because you cannot, run in the risks of something, being present there, and then at the moment that you need it, it doesn't really work. So maintenance will be a key issue, and inspection from authorities and ports and everyone else. But there's also another class of risks, and this is the dispute resolution process risk. So we all know today how to handle a quality dispute, which comes with a bunker. With a bunker. So let's say the bunker is off specification. So today the process is quite clear. So the ship owner will have their own testing program. They take a sample at the ship manifold, they send the sample at the laboratory, results come back. If they are in spec, the fuel starts to be used by the crew. If instead is off spec, then the dispute starts and the parties are involved, joint testing operations with samples that were kept. So all this is known now. But, is about to change, and a lot. And it's not very clear how this will play out, particularly because ammonia, LNG, and methanol, they have a big problem, which is related to the lifespan of the samples taken. Even just taking the samples of these products is very difficult. And I don't know if it will be possible at all. But the lifespan of the samples, assuming you can take samples, is pretty limited. It's a matter of days. These samples will be not good anymore, so not representative of the fuel you were supplied with. So if you have a quality dispute, there's a big risk that you will not be able to investigate the quality dispute. And this is concerning for ship owners particularly, because they will have a claim, have a problem with this new fuel, and how do you assign blame? Which, sorry, it's not a very nice way to say it, but how do you investigate who was responsible for this? Most of the times you will not be able to. And this is something that needs to be understood by the ship owners and by the P&I Club. Instead, when it comes to biofuels, samples will be taken, samples will have a considerable lifespan. But as of today, the specifications are not there. So you have a lot of risks. Even, and I was mentioning it before, even when the new ISO 8217 will come up, which should be this year, they will address partially the biofuels. But the biofuels, meaning the FAME, so fatty acid methyl esters. Current biofuels, they're made from what I've seen so far, roughly of 40% FAME only, and the rest is other biocomponent, refined vegetable oils, because these components are cheaper. And that makes biofuels affordable, but it makes biofuels off specification according to the incoming ISO 8217. So there will be a reckoning by the industry when this the specifications come up. And I've handled recently an interesting case in which, and of course we don't name names, but there was a charterer who ordered a parcel of biofuel, B100, and it was supplied with this fuel, but there was no specification of this fuel. So the supplier basically could have put whatever he wanted into this biofuel, and they had problems on board as soon as they started using it because the filter got clogged. And then we looked through the documentation, we started the investigation, and what we've seen, which was rather remarkable, is that the charter party between the charterer and the ship owner was still saying that the fuel had to be ISO 8217:2010. So you have a very big concern there, because the charterers who are ordering biofuels today, I mean, they have to make sure that the ship owner have accepted and have that into the charter party, or at least in a separate agreement. But it's something that needs to be advised to charterers in particular, because there's very little regulation now, and it will continue like this for the next few years, because the ISO 8217, they're not addressing the reality of the situation.
So it sounds like from what you're saying there, it's that the charter party was not actually updated enough to keep abreast of the new developments.
Yes, and I've seen this, I mean, particularly now with biofuels, but I've seen this also before biofuels came into place. I mean, we've had in the last few years bunker quality disputes in which I have consulted, and I mean, we all know the latest specification for bunkers were issued in 2017. I was still finding bunker clauses which were related to the version of the 8217 of the year 1996, because nobody really looks at it. It's just copy-pasted through for 30 years, and so it is pretty concerning, and it needs really to be addressed, because there's really there's a problem there, particularly for charterers.
Yeah. Fantastic. Nick, I see you nodding away at some of the things that Diego is saying. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, it sounds like there's some work for BIMCO to do there with the bunkering clauses, particularly for the long-term time charters. Obviously, with voyage charters, the owner will have control over what they're putting into their vessel tanks, but in long-term time charters, obviously it's the charterers that make the decisions and are responsible for the bunkers being put in board. So there may have to be a bit more work done there, by the sounds of it, Diego.
Thank you. And Matt, anything, any insight or thoughts on, not sure whether it's something you typically see?
I think we have plenty of bunker claims as it is. I think there'll be a new form, and I really take on board your comments about the longevity of samples. I think that's something that, the headline will be, oh, they're cleaner fuels. But when you have a dispute, it looks like one will be much longer, much more drawn out, and much more expensive.
Thank you. So this question is for Matt and Nick. From an insurer's point of view, what are some risk management measures that you would expect to see from your clients when it comes to underwriting assets? Perhaps to start with Matt.
Yeah, I mean, we always lean on the fundamental of prudent uninsured, so act as if you don't have insurance. I think when you look at new asset classes, it's often the first movers, and it's often the first few instances that are the best risk managed. The issue that we tend to find is after, and we saw it a lot with, if you look at LNG as an example, the first LNG carriers were fantastically well maintained, beautifully looked after, no expense was spared, and they were fantastically well run and had amazing loss records. Then as the industry established itself, people became less scared of it as a class, more and more vessels get developed, you start to see more vessels on the spot trade. People think, yeah, we've got this now, and people tend to run things a little bit cheaper than they did before, and maybe take their eye off the ball. So for new asset classes, risk management is always front and center. As things age, when something is 5 or 10 or 15 years old, people then start to think about it a little bit less. And I thought Diego's slide earlier, where he went through all the new fuels, and everyone's sitting there going, geez, why are we using these things? And then brought up, you know, MFO and HFO and all those fuels are horrific things. If you had one of those and put them all together, you go, well, they're all as bad as each other.
Right, right. So I suppose when you say first movers being more cautious, it's because you don't want to end up on the front page of the papers for the wrong reasons. So you take a lot more care with that sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. It's when, and often the guys at the forefront are the real blue chip owners. You know, they want to do it. They want to publicly be seen to be doing the whole ESG thing.
ESG, yes.
And they don't want to end up with egg on their faces, so they will run it, not necessarily at a loss, but they won't worry too much about how profitable it is, because it's good PR and it's pushing technology forwards. But it's, you know, when those vessels are sold second hand and they're 15 years old, that's when is more of a concern for the insurance industry than when they're brand new.
Right. And Nick, is that your experience as well, or?
Well, I would echo what Matt said. If you're a first mover, you want to see a return on your investment from a research and development point of view. So, as you say, it's often the bigger players who will move first. But ultimately, at the International Group, we don't underwrite the risk. It's the individual clubs within the group that will take the initial decision as to whether to underwrite the risk on a vessel. At the group, it's a question of, over a period of time, if there are enough ship owners wanting to get involved in a particular space, then it will come to the group for assessment as to whether or not that risk, that new emerging risk, should be pooled or not. If it's pooled, that means it's mutual amongst 90% of the ship owners in the world. So there is a bit of a process there, but it's ultimately the individual clubs that will look at that risk analysis in the first place, and they'll be speaking to their ship owners. They'll be understanding, what are the intricacies of the risk that they're looking to underwrite, and then they'll be providing cover off the back of that. I think perhaps the best example recently is the move towards more autonomous vessels. Particularly where, there are lots of stages of autonomy. You've got stages 1, 2, 3, 4 identified by IMO. And it's really, we're presently in the stage where we're really moving from category 2 to category 3. That's category 3 is where you don't have anyone on board, but you will have a remote operating center with potentially a master mariner maneuvering the vessel around. Again, Singapore is doing a huge amount of work in the autonomous vessel space. So it's really understanding that risk and looking at the regulation around that. I suspect with autonomous vessels, it will be mainly coastal and inland waterways in one particular country, because there's a huge amount of regulatory hurdles in terms of international regulation that will need to be looked at and is being looked at for vessels to trade from one country to another. So these are sort of things that people will be looking at.
Thank you, thank you. So we've got quite a few questions to run through, so I think it's been a very engaging discussion. People have got questions. The first one is, how will insurers need to train its underwriters to manage these new risks? So I think it's a bit connected to what you were saying earlier, Matt and Nick.
Yeah, now I'm not an underwriter and a broker, I can argue that most underwriters aren't trained. I think where the insurance industry works best is it learns from experience. When a new risk comes to light, people will sit down, we'll have committee meetings, we'll attend conferences, and we'll try and predict what's going to happen. But ultimately, the role of insurance is to take that unknown away from a ship owner. And sometimes insurers get this right, and the underwriters pat themselves on the back and go, yep, we knew that was going to happen. We've risk managed it out of the system. Often it's the other way around, and the lesson is very, very expensive. But nothing drives progress like red ink. And training underwriters is very much trial and error. I think and again, going back to training, as we were talking about earlier, training of underwriters happens when they work with other underwriters and they work in the business sitting next to people with more experience. And whilst it sounds a little bit flippant, I think working from home has absolutely impacted the quality of underwriters there are, and will probably impede the training of underwriters for new asset classes.
Because there's some situations where you just need to be in the office, you need
Absolutely,
to be
yeah.
brainstorming and collaborating.
Sorry, perhaps if I can add something on this topic, is that, I mean, in my opinion, there should be also an element of seeing things for yourself. So I think across the industry, there should be company policies and so forth for people to go more often on board ships. So everyone, not just the crew, should know what happens on board the ship, how loading and discharging operations and bunkering operations are carried out. So this is what I usually suggest, not just to insurers, but also within ship owners. Nowadays, you have people that, they don't come from a sailing background, and maybe they haven't really seen or stepped on board the ship. So my recommendation is part of the training. Of course, you need to know, the cargoes that you're dealing with, you need to know the risks, but you have to know how a ship works. So you have to go on board at least, once a year or something like this, but you have to step on board, do a short navigation or attend a loading or discharge operation or a bunkering operation. And we have we're very lucky being based in Singapore that we have so many bunkering operations here, just, within the port, that it's easy for players to step on board, and I think this should be implemented.
Thank you. And that seems like it addresses another question which was raised, which is, do you think the current marine crews are equipped and trained to handle the new assets? So it sounds like, from what you're saying, Diego, that they are, and it's a continuous effort to keep this up.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Nick, here's one for you, and it might be a bit more of a technical question. How do you anticipate the insurance industry adapting to the evolving risks associated with new asset classes, specifically in terms of pricing and coverage terms?
Well, I think I've sort of answered that to a large degree already, but I think from the group's perspective, it's assessment of the risk, it's looking at claims records as they develop over a period of time, and then that will get factored into the underwriting that is done by the individual clubs. At group level, we will look at the whole risk holistically across the industry, bringing the expertise of the 12 international group clubs and our industry association partners just to work with that risk. But ultimately, we are there to support ship owners as they are taking the ultimate risk of sending their vessels out to sea. And we know what types of third-party claims are likely to come out of those ventures, but obviously with the emerging new fuels and things, there may be slight nuances where different things happen.
Yeah. Thank you. And Matt, how do you convince reinsurers to come on board with new risk? Is
Money.
there a need to convince them, or are you quite happy to?
I think, yeah, if the premium is there, you'll find reinsurers. Often for, the major programs, and obviously the international group program it's the largest marine reinsurance contract in the world. That's one where all the reinsurers need to be on board. But again, we are at an interesting crossroads. A lot of the big insurance carriers and the big reinsurance carriers want to be seen to be supporting the green transition, decarbonisation, whatever you want to call it. And for them to support these initiatives as reinsurers, I think there is a strong argument for them to do that, and they're very receptive to it.
And I would add to that I think, obviously communication all the way through, as we understand the risk better, for us it's our role to help to ensure that the reinsurers understand the risks that the clubs are taking on these emerging risks. And provided there is that strong partnership, then, as you said, Matt, the reinsurers want to come on board for their own decarbonisation objectives.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one last question, which is, will the marine insurance industry be brave enough to insure nuclear vessels? Not sure who wants to take that one on.
I'd say yes. I think there'll be, because I'm not thinking about the liabilities, which is obviously where Nick's concerns lie. It will be, it's from a technology perspective, yes, there's a lot of unknowns around the type of nuclear propulsion. The kind of science of the reactor downstream is fairly straightforward. But yeah, I think it will happen, and someone is not going to do it without insurance.
I think there are some significant regulatory hurdles which will be there from ports and governments before they will allow nuclear-powered commercial vessels into their ports. And I think those would need to be addressed at quite an early stage. I appreciate that there are a number of projects which I think are coming online potentially by 2032 to show that it's technically possible. I mean, we've already had nuclear-powered naval vessels operating for many, many years. So the technology is there. It's just a question of is it socially and legally going to be acceptable?
And overcoming public perception, I suppose, about the issue. Diego, anything to add? I know alternative fuels are your thing.
Well, when it comes to nuclear, I think also from the experts' point of view, we're very early stages. But I mean, it is something that if will come, I mean, we will look for nuclear experts to add to our team, and we'll continue consulting on this. So.
Because you'd be out of a job, Diego.
And I can't wait to make a presentation on this.
Well, I think that's all the time we've got for today. Again, ending off sounding a bit like a US game show host. But thank you to our panel for a really stimulating and engaging discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Tan and the panelists for the thought-provoking discussion. Please remain on stage for a group photo. Thank you, panelists and Ms. Tan.